Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel. I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other Sisyphean host.
Brian, hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
What game have you been playing a lot recently, Joel?
Hades, the game of Greeks.
Yeah, where Sisyphus is a very lovely bit of a himbo character.
Yeah.
He's nice.
There's himbos and herbos and dembos and all that kind of stuff in the game.
I saw herbo on Twitter recently, and I was like, I'm pretty sure there's another word for that, and it's not a nice word.
Brian,
Don't use it.
I think this was a journey you went through in a bit personally about Buffy, because you were like, Buffy is like a leggy himbo. What's that called? Oh wait, no.
Did I say that on the podcast
you
already?
said it to me.
Okay, cute.
You didn't say it on the podcast.
Yeah.
But like no, I think a herbo is a very different thing to a bimbo.
A herbo is also another thing, though, isn't it?
No, you're thinking of Haribo.
No, I'm thinking like. I think I'm thinking of going herping, but that's a different thing altogether. Whatever.
So this week we were talking, as we are Sisypheanly bound to talk to every week, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Mm-hmm. We're talking about season 5, episode 21, The Weight of the World. Yeah,
which was directed by David Solomon, who last directed Listening to Fear, and it was written by Doug Petrie, who last wrote Checkpoint. And it was first aired on May 15th, 2001.
See, Give us that Buffy and summary there, Brian.
Yeah. Willow takes charge of the retreat to town and sends Spike and Xander to interrogate Doc, whom they fight and seemingly kill. Spike eventually conveys to the others the link between Ben and Glory, which mortals cannot remember. Glory prepares for a ritual in which she will bleed Dawn dry to use the key. Dawn briefly escapes, but is betrayed by Ben, to whom Glory promises continued existence. Willow enters Buffy's mind and talks her out of her despair over a moment when she thought of killing Dawn. That's not true. Okay. After reading Doc's scrolls, Giles says that killing Dawn is the only way to save the world. Wow, this person who wrote this book didn't understand.
I think I see how they got there from what Buffy actually says, but we can get into that.
Okay.
As we want to do. So in terms of our bronze banter this week, we have been subjecting ourselves to queer joy, queer rage, and queer despair, I think it's fair to say. In a very emotional couple of viewings. I think the first thing we should talk about is that we have, as the vast majority of the queer population seems to have done,
certainly in the UK and Ireland,
binge watched Russell T Davies' 5-part program Ixa Sing, which
Joel Russell T Davies you know best for.
So I've mentioned in passing that I'm an occasional viewer of Doctor Who. Russell T Davies, who I'm sure we've mentioned before, but Russell T Davies, or RTD, was the man who brought back Doctor Who against all odds in 2005 after it had been cancelled for 19 years, and reinvigorated the form, reignited interest, wrote some of the best, the best Doctor Who and some of the best science fiction ever to be put to page. And prior to what was once called New Who, or Revival Who, which has now been going 16 years, he was probably most well known for having created Queer as Folk, which is a seminal and a very transgressive and very challenging at the time show just about gay men.
It's not too unchallenging these days. I mean, like, for one thing, the basically it's about 3 gay men, one of whom is underage, and has sex with adults, which at the time very controversial, and even now very controversial. And I think the idea at the time was to portray actual experiences, which, I mean, like, that certainly was happening. But Queer as Folk. I fucking love Queer as Folk. The UK version. It was a huge formative text for me when I was growing up. And it's also very, very Doctor Who obsessed. One of the characters is a mad Whovian.
Yeah. It's funny to watch now because it is portrayed at a time when no one really knew anymore really what Doctor Who was, had kind of a sense of what it was. And then there was some obsessives who had VHS tapes, and obviously that's not the most important part of it, but it shows at the time when gay men and all that was very much not in the mainstream or accepted to the degree that I think it's fair to say that it is now, and didn't have
not even close.
The degree of civil integration.
I would suggest it's probably the first queer TV show entirely, in the sense that I can't think of any predating TV show which entirely focuses on queer issues. what's it called, Tales from the City is probably not hugely far off, and there are certainly special episodes from different TV shows and a couple of gay characters and things, but this was a show
from our perspective, as a community, and so funnily, if you've never seen it, I think I actually may have told the story before, but one of the main viewpoint character is, oh god, him of the accent, what's his name?
Aidan Gillen,
who plays Peter Littlefinger. Littlefinger is his like nom de guerre, but his real name's Peter Baelish in the show. And also Charlie Hunnam plays the young character who in Queer as Folk is 15. I feel if that was written out, he'd probably be 17.
Well, the American Queer as Folk, they remade Queer as Folk for America. It ran for 6 seasons, and I watched all of it. I really like it. It is dumb as shit, but he was recast as an 18-year-old in that.
Which I think is more, like, in many ways, is more to the point of what that's the point of his character, rather than there's a whole other realm of stuff, obviously, with him being 15, which is a whole mire, I think.
But Charlie Hunnam, who has been in Sons of Anarchy for years and years. He was in Green Street, and he was in Pacific Rim, stuff like that. So he's a known property. He's
a history with rims. And so anyway, we're talking about Ixta saying Russell T Davies went on, this person who wrote this like really like after watershed gay TV show, revived the most family friendly Saturday morning show of Doctor Who, ran for years,
and very much introduced queerness into Doctor Who.
Yeah, very absolutely. Importantly, we all make fun of now the character of Captain Jack Harkness as being this like randy bisexual pirate kind of thing, but it was. There's a scene very early on, 2005 in Doctor Who, where Jack leaves and he kisses Rose, played by Billie Piper, and he kisses the Doctor in equal measure, and it's just not a thing, and obviously that's very important. Russell T Davies went on to do a number of other things, including
Cucumber, Banana.
He wrote a series, Cucumber, which was kind of about basically men who would have grown up in the 80s, but who were a lot, older gay men, basically, in the what's that, like mid-10s, what are we even calling that?
I don't know.
Which was rarely depicted on television, and that was accompanied by a couple of things. Banana, which was a shorter sister series, which was from a younger perspective, and Tofu, which we didn't watch, which was a web series about like people's actual experiences.
Yeah, it was interviews.
Which was not I don't think ultimately as good as Queer as Folk or Ixta Sing, but it was very good. And
I really like it. Yeah,
there's a lot about it.
It was a little hokey at times and a little silly, but like that's okay.
Yeah, and I think something we always say is that you end up watching a lot of queer content where that's absolute trash purely because gay people are in it. And what Russell T Davies made were shows which were actually pretty good and were either great or absolutely worth watching. And what he's released now, Ixta Sing, is a topic which he has more or less avoided in his writing for a very long time, for obvious painful reasons, but which is the AIDS epidemic in the 80s
in London specifically.
The first massive kind of viral Armageddon of our generation, despite what some people might claim during COVID.
Yep.
And about the experiences of gay men who an entire and we're probably preaching to the choir here to a large degree, but an entire generation which was just erased by it. But it was very good.
It was really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's on. If you want to watch it, you can torrent it probably. The first episode was aired on Channel 4 if you're in the UK. Yeah. And it's all available on All 4. Is that what it's called?
All 4.
Yeah, which is the on demand.
If you can get that, and it's coming to HBO Max in the North American territories
in a couple of months, I think.
Yeah,
but so it's kind of like every episode covers time period, and then it jumps a couple of years to next episode. I think I cried during every episode minus the first episode, and I genuinely kind of just bawled crying at the.
It's something which I think a lot of queer and ally listeners as well, but definitely queer listeners are aware of. Is like you see a lot of this kind of content, and it's important, and it's so essential to understand our own history and the community that we're part of. And I do find that it is something I've talked to people who straight people, family members, and that kind of stuff, who don't have that visceral understanding of that is part of our history, and there is a gulf there, I think, and it's important to be part of that. But it can be difficult to watch because if it's good, you see yourself and you see people you know. So I certainly try to put a ration out that kind of content. But what Russell T Davies does, and one of the reasons why he's one of my absolute favourite people, is he's very adamant about portraying the joy of the experience of being gay and of being with and having that found family, alongside the unavoidable strife and horror that can come with it at times. And it's an incredibly deft way of like, yeah, this is actually something I really relate to, this feeling of like being under tremendous pressure and also being around the best people, you know. And yeah, so it is absolute must-see TV. It is very funny at times. It is very deft, I think, how it balances. It doesn't try to answer any questions. It just shows people. And it's engaging and devastating equal measure, because you look at it, it's like, yeah, these are people I would have known potentially if I was alive in that age. That age of empires. Kind of
and importantly, the kind of what I would say is, like, you know, a huge praise from my perspective is that it kind of enters the canon of AIDS. The AIDS canon, alongside texts like
that's how they got you.
Alongside texts like Angels of America, which is a huge favorite of mine and a lot of people's, on the basis of it being kind of very like, you know, like I think where Angels in America is an incredibly expressive and very surrealistic text, as Booker staring in the window.
I can see him silently screaming through the window.
Where it's very surrealistic text. This is much more like, you know, like tragic comedy and very but like played straight. But it's like that same sense of fun and expression, and like one of the best things that like queers have going for us is that like there's Booker scratching on the door, is that we are able to make light of tragedy. But it's really good. I like, one of the things that you know, when you watch those things, it's like one of the things I experienced with it was that I like, you rarely experience it, like cried tears of rage. You know, remember when I watched 12 Years a Slave for the first time in the cinema with you?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And I was just talking about this yesterday with our friends, but like we walked to the cinema, and like I was like, during the movie I was crying tears of rage, and I was afterwards like waxing poetical about, like, you know, the grave injustice on the human spirit or some nonsense like that. But just, and that's a really shitty way to put it, but that kind of deep sense of injustice and unfairness and
Margaret Thatcher cameos in one episode, and you shout at the television. I haven't seen you that angry at television since you were playing Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. You always shout at Margaret Thatcher when she comes on the TV.
I do, and I'm gonna have a lot more fun when it's Gillian Anderson when we get to that with the Crown. Okay, the other thing we watched, and we'll keep this brief, is Euphoria.
Can I make one last remark about X thing before I forget? Is that I've seen a lot of people tweeting about, a lot of people watching it and all that kind of stuff, and which I was trying to articulate is, why is this particularly striking people? Some people who I wouldn't usually necessarily share this kind of content. And I think that it's not even necessarily a youth thing. It's not even necessarily people who are 5 years or maybe even 10 years younger than us, because there's occasionally people who are much closer to us in age, but some people just don't have, like, there's a moment when you watch one of those films for the first time and you have that feeling of seeing yourself and this gulf. And some people haven't necessarily had that, and not because they avoid it, because they don't immerse themselves in the community in the same way that we do. And I think for a lot of people, what's been interesting to see is, I think a lot of people are seeing a gay show for the first time and are seeing the minutiae of what that time was like and how that is part of our history for the first time, and that in itself is a gift from Russell T Davies to bring this back for people in a way that's accessible.
Yeah. And I think it's very important to note that, like, some people don't actively search archival footage, you know, in the way that we do. Like, we would go back and be like, oh, there's a 70s horror movie, let's watch it, it sounds interesting. A lot of people will stick to stuff that is currently being releasing. There are people who would watch TV live and go to the cinema to see movies, or watch movies as they come on TV. And if you're doing that, you don't necessarily go and find this like sleeper hit TV show from 2004 that actually got really well acclaimed but didn't. And that's a totally legitimate way to watch it. And it's a really important reason as to why you keep these things fresh and current and continue to like to remember what's happened.
Yeah. So I absolutely agree with you, but I just wanted to acknowledge that because every time there's a resurgence of people paying attention to themselves and to each other, it just heartens me.
Yeah, me too.
Euphoria.
So keep this brief. The second Euphoria special came out, which is the first one I think we talked about. It came out in December, and it was basically a interstitial episode between seasons 1 and 2. Season 2 should be coming out this year, apparently, the end of the year, and that was from the perspective of Rue, who is Zendaya, and this episode is Zendaya.
No, just Zendaya is Rue. I was going to say
Zendaya is Rue, yeah. And this episode is from the perspective of Jules, who is her girlfriend, who is portrayed by Hunter Schafer, and it was super, super fucking good. I wasn't when I watched the Rue one, I was like, oh, that's interesting, cool. I loved the Rue one, and I wasn't expecting the Jules one to be like anything near as good. But Hunter Schafer co-wrote this episode with the series creator Sam Levinson, and and Hunter Schafer is trans, and her character is trans.
Yeah,
and it very aggressively felt like a trans voice speaking through the text, and trans such a deeply genuine trans experience within it, and it was light and very sad at times and very easy to watch. It was like an hour and a half, but I don't think it was quite that long, but it breezed by because it was great. It was really, really good. I love it.
It helps that Hunter Schafer is an effervescent actor to watch.
She's so fucking good.
But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So I read a little bit around it, and I read an Autostraddle article about it as well, which I thought was really interesting.
I think I read the same one.
Yeah. So a couple of things which I hadn't 100% put together when watching it, but the initial episode in this interstitial arc with Rue and her sponsor is kind of a two-hander with an older authority figure or an advisor, and in this episode, Jules is
carries it the whole thing.
But is also in conversation with her therapist. It's a similar dynamic, who is played by the actress whose name we really should learn.
I don't know.
But who plays the nurse in Looking, and who is wonderful and we love. And so I thought there was some interesting things in that article, because it's interesting to watch queer content which is kind of within your superset of queerness, but it's not your lived experience. Because a lot of the article I read and a lot of what I read around it intimated, as we could sense and as we felt, that the episode was exceptionally integrated Hunter's own perspective or writing and experience, and had an authentic voice, but perhaps through the show itself there was aspects of potentially dangerous trans misogynistic tropes at the very least, or if not dangerous, reckless in some of it, which I can definitely see from the aspect that Jules kind of portrayed as a that manic, unpredictable, mysterious person kind of thing. What the show does, and which I was trying to put my thumb on it when I was talking to you about this the other day, is it kind of retells the show up until this point from Jules' perspective, and shows how much that the viewpoint through Rue has been mythologizing her, or at least monopolizing the experience, and that the episode gives Jules so much more agency and humanity. And I felt a little, as I think you're meant to as a viewer, a little abashed to the extent that I had just accepted Rue's interpretation as a viewpoint, if you know what I mean. I kind of feel like, I have also kind of bogged into this idea of Jules as this unpredictable character when she's just trying to react like a person to a lot of these. It was really interesting. I was really engaging. And as you said, the second episode of it, I think it's going to be 3, isn't there?
No, just 2.
Oh, just 2. Okay, well, oftentimes, as you said, 2 don't. The follow up to something like the other one isn't usually of the same quality, but it was really fascinating. I thought,
it was really good.
Yeah,
and visually great. There was some beautiful photography in it. Go watch Euphoria and make sure to watch Spy Holes. Okay, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Brings back.
Absolutely. So, since we're speaking about going inside the troubled mind of a young girl, nailed it. In this episode, we have Buffy in a state of what everything refers to as
Catatonia,
catatonia because Giles says that once. But I think
I was doing a bit of Wikipediaing around catatonia. I'm not too uncomfortable with that phrase for this situation.
Yes, but I think basically so. Buffy has finally reached a point that she considers a personal failure. She's lost Dong, and I think she's just fully dissociating. She's separated. She the episode revolves around this crux, which we kind of get to at the end, which is and which has been alluded to before by Slayers, which I think is fascinating, is that in all Slayers is the feeling that at some point they're going to give up, or just for a moment, or just want the pressure to stop, and that is when they die.
Yeah, and it's very specifically voiced by Spike in what episode was that called? I can't remember now.
It's not Lover's Walk, is it?
No, it was after Lover's Walk. It was the one in this season where he recounts Nikki Woods. Yeah, and I can't remember the name of the episode, but it's specifically tied into that Buffy had that moment at one point where she felt that it was too much, and that's the crack that was like unavail her. And let's get straight into it. What I found really fast, I felt as textually, it actually stood up really well. Like in the sense, I think that Joss Whedon has constantly aimed for psychological realism or emotional realism when it comes to his text, and never like trying to portray actual realism. Is realism a phrase I need to explain? I think it's maybe
with a capital or if you might want to.
Realism, I suppose, is the traditional literary mode whereby the fantastical is excluded and you attempt to portray the lived experience of a person. Though realism is often try to be portrayed very objectively. So you say like, he did this, and he did this, and he had this stuff in his pockets and this. And you have this problem with those texts where, the actual act of focusing on certain specifics about a life is always subjective. So there's no objective truth in that situation. And often then, this is basically the whole point of Ulysses, is that the subjective truth of a matter the truth of a matter is so slippery that the deeper you dive into attempting a truthful portrayal of a person or an experience, by listing, by diving deep into psychology, the closer you get to a center that doesn't necessarily exist, and etc. So realism, which is that's all totally unrelated to what this is, but realism, basically being a kind of like a gritty, realistic portrayal of something, let's just say.
Yeah, but the more you focus on something, the more you're excluding other things. And in that is your viewpoint, your subjectivity, what you think is important to portray, invariably has your fingerprints on it.
Yeah, it's the Heisenberg effect.
Yeah, exactly. So like you can't, like, realism
it's
is
actually really not, but anyway, sorry. Go on.
I was going to make that illusion as well. The act of observation changes the observed. Yeah,
absolutely. So basically the act of portraying something, in choosing to portray it and in choosing what to portray, has an effect on the perception of what it is. So pointing a camera at a thing changes it because there's a camera in front of it, and the thing might react to a camera. The angle of the photo taken changes your perspective on it, etc. There's no objective truth in portrayal or in media or anything.
Bring us back to Buffy for me.
Buffy. So Joss Whedon's always gone for an emotional realism, whereby he's trying to portray the emotional truth of a scene or a character or a context, which is perfect for this show because the show has no sense of realism in its setting. It's pure fantasy slash science fiction slash horror. And instead what you can find though within that is emotional truths about the characters that portray genuine experiences that people have. So through Buffy, we can explore what it is to feel like to find adulthood, what it is to feel grief. I mean, like, if you didn't experience Buffy's grief watching the body, like,
corpse.
I don't like, that is the most emotional true episode of TV I can think of to hand right now. So within this, I think I've already lost what the original thing I was going to say was. Oh shit!
So the emotional realism that Joss portrays, you think is evident or is represented in this episode.
Yeah, and I thought that what I found really striking about this episode was that moment that they really focus on, which is Buffy thinking for a second, if I gave up, it'd be easier. Mm-hmm. Is really fantastic psychologically, because it's an intrusive thought is what's happened there. It's not Buffy saying, I want to give up, I will give up. It's Buffy feeling like, for a moment, having that intrusive thought of, it will be easier to not have to do this. And that tiny chink in her armor whereby she is tired, and, you know, psychologically there's probably some aspect of her brain that is saying, I'm too tired to do this, please give up for a bit so I can handle this, is so damaging to this person who has the weight of the world on her shoulders, who has so much responsibility and so much pressure, that she cannot handle having that thought. And, like, you know, that's the thing that everyone experiences, is an intrusive thought that makes you feel like, by thinking it, you've done it. And that's the whole point of the episode. I think that's really good.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you on that. I had the episode, which is not one I remember very well, had a slight Babadook effect on me, where I was like, there's something, obviously this, where we're, you know, basically the framing device is that Willow goes into Buffy's mind and tries to help her through this loop that she's in to bring her back. And we keep returning to this moment to replace in the book, and there been this like musical cue that something has happened. And I guess against my better nature, I was like, that book probably says how to kill Gloria or something. I thought it was going to be something more plot related. You know,
that's literally the experience I had watching this when I was like 11, was that moment. I was like, oh yeah, must have something special about that book.
Yeah, and you do get kind of undercut in a good way by it. And it's something which I found very subtle and very revealing, because this might be an odd thing to articulate if my mother is still listening. My sister often asks, can I just, because obviously our podcasts are all explicit, she often asks, can I record a podcast that she can listen to, like about, like, I don't know, the Descendants or something. So she might hear this eventually. But when my sister was a baby, I had, you know, similarly once or twice had intrusive thoughts about, you know, accidentally killing her, not, you know, in terms of like trying to hold the baby, drop the baby, and that responsibility. And it's exactly the same feeling. It's like I had that, and I was young enough at the time, and I had the feeling like, am I a terrible murderer person? And the fear, but it's not generated obviously from a desire to do that. It's generated from the fear of the responsibility and the worry that you won't measure up to something you find very important. And I thought, I actually found that very immediately relatable, where I was like, oh yeah, Buffy has a fundamental misunderstanding of how actually responsible she is, and the fact that she can help people does not mean that when she fails to help people that she has harmed them.
Well, that's the ultimate moral question, isn't it? And, like, you know, it's the moral subjectivist versus the objectivist issue at the heart of the season. You know, to save the world, would you kill one person? And, you know, you see Ben really struggling with that in this episode, whereby he decides no.
For a bit.
He decides, you know, no, he would not just save the world or kill one, like, he would just kill this person to improve his own standing. And with that, you know, so basically what Buffy's experiencing is that idea that, like, or how you phrased it, is that idea that, like, you, if you can do an action to improve a situation, are you morally obliged to do so? And what you have in Buffy is someone who has the ability to change almost everything. And what do you do with that responsibility? Which is like, you know, kind of like a moral philosophy extreme case, you know, because very few people have the kind of responsibility or power that Buffy does as a Slayer, minus, like, you know, very high politicians. President Bartlett. I've just finished my rewatch of West Wing.
Oh, you finished it, have you?
Yeah, I finished it yesterday morning.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Season 6 and 7 actually really quite good.
Just season 5, that's the weak point.
Season 5 is very weak. Yeah, okay. But that's when Aaron Sorkin had left the show and they had no idea how to write it, basically. Anyway, very interesting moral philosophical issue here. But I found it just a very fascinating moment, because she, like, the text of it, I don't think she says I want to kill Dawn at any point. She feels like I could let it happen and I don't have to deal with anymore then.
Well, you know, to be fair, if you're skimming through the episode to make a summary, there is a scene where she actually does suffocate Dawn with a pillow in her dreams.
Yes.
So that's fairly, I think, on the nose.
Yeah, but I think that's very clearly portrayal of her sense of guilt, that, like, you know, having had that thought means that she must on some level want to kill her, or she already has killed her, or she bears responsibility for killing her, having had that thought.
Yeah, and I don't think Buffy is inherently if I'm being serious, I don't think Buffy's inherently a better person than anyone else. But it is one of the things which the show says that makes her distinctive, and potentially makes her distinctive from other Slayers in the past, is Giles wouldn't have that dream. I don't think a lot of the characters would have that dream. I think probably a lot of the characters would easily come to the, you know, under sufficient pressure that it's okay to kill one person to save the world.
Well, we know that next week.
Yeah, exactly. But I think a lot of the cast would, but Buffy doesn't, and that is kind of what sets her apart to a certain degree.
That is the text of the next episode, and it's one of my favorite notes of the show is that moment. So if you haven't seen the episode yet, well, sorry, if you haven't seen Buffy yet, please just go and watch all of Buffy before listening to this podcast. Maybe that'd be a good idea. Or don't care about spoilers. But obviously, in the next episode, Giles kills Ben to kill Glory.
Yeah. Well, very crucially, and we'll talk about a lot in this episode, I'm pretty certain Buffy lets him go. Yeah,
Buffy basically doesn't, Buffy lets him go, and Giles kills him and says, like, Buffy, and Ben's kind of saying, like, you know, Buffy doesn't want this, and Giles says, no, Buffy could never do this. That's why I have to. So.
I actually think specifically what Giles says, and again we'll come to it, is no, Buffy couldn't do this because she's a hero.
Yeah.
And, you know, the heroes need other people around them. So yeah, it's very, very interesting.
I'm actually getting chills.
Yeah,
a little bit.
And I sometimes feel
I fucking love this show, Joel.
It's a quite good program. We think we're quite clever.
Me and you.
No, like society people.
Well, me and you definitely do.
Us as well. But with our high speed broadband and like with our like blenders and automobiles and all the things which apparently I think make up society.
Apparently everything that makes up society minus broadband is stuff from the 50s, but okay.
Yeah. But when you think about, and obviously I've been thinking about mythology because I've been playing a lot of mythological games at the moment, but the way we as a race, as a species, as a civilization, articulated stories thousands of years ago, were these passion plays where characters represented concepts to explain things in the world and to give a digestible parable or context for imparting a lesson or a point of view. And we've just never really stopped doing that. The fact that the entire genre or concept of a fantasy TV show exists, why are millions of people sitting down to watch dozens of TV shows where it's like a girl has magic powers to fight vampires, but really it's about the moral subjectivism of whether you can kill. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like we have tricked ourselves to thinking that these are more complex forms of art or creation, but it is exactly the same thing that was being, you know, spoken around campfires 12,000 years ago, which apparently 100%. As we've discussed is when I think humans evolved.
Yeah, and also it's the same, like, I mean, this is Shakespeare, you know. Macbeth isn't just about Macbeth. Macbeth is about guilt, it's about sadness, it's about the moral duty of the king and stuff like this. Metaphor through story has existed through the ages, and it's a beautiful thing.
Heavy is the head that wears a crown. Is that Macbeth?
No.
Is that Hamlet?
Oh, maybe it is actually.
Yeah.
Macbeth.
You know, one of our wankier things we said in a while, and that is a challenge, is we had a conversation recently where we said as soon as we're out of lockdown, we really should go and see more Shakespeare in person. Yeah. And I mean it. I really mean it.
I love Shakespeare.
It's so, like, of course.
So there's actually, I think, a Shakespeare reference in this where Ben wakes up from having been Glory, and he's basically experienced like Glory murdered all the knights, and he's saying, like, there's blood all over my hands, get it off, and there's no blood in his hands. And it was a very Lady Macbeth moment because Joss Whedon is a huge Shakespeare fan, Shakespeare stan, I would say, even. So what were you saying there about mythology?
I think a lot of very poignant things. It'd be hard to pick out a specific one.
I think the reason that Buffy has lasted as long as it has is that it incorporates so well the emotional meaning of these things, so that when you're an 11-year-old watching this, or just someone who isn't, like, doesn't want to or can't read the ridiculous depths into it that we do, which often are just us making shit up, but it works perfectly. It's a wonderful adventure story. It's exciting. It's fun. The characters are nice. They're humorous. And then it has depth there if you want it. And often its depth is brought to the surface and communicated very clearly. And it's a really well-balanced show. Anyway, other things that we said we would talk about, because we have like a list of 18 things we have talked about, basically nothing. I really like Willow in this episode. I think that her approach of being the leader is great.
Yeah, so I think absolutely. So I think Willow takes a very deputy leader role in this episode, which of course, having like really, if you think about where she's come over the last few seasons, is quite nice to see, and it shows that she can use her magic and her abilities appropriately as well, because I think it's better that it's not just a constant descent into her being reckless. Like, there is obviously a reason why she wants all this power. If she didn't have it, then we would be in a very difficult situation here. Yeah, we wouldn't have had a shield around the Four Aces motel or wherever the fuck they were.
Buffy wouldn't be brought back. She would have been continued to have existed in catatonic state in that loop. Yeah, and one of the things that I really liked about Willow in this episode is at one point, Buffy says, or baby Buffy says to Willow, "You speak funny," and Willow says, "Yeah, you told me that again in an AP Science class or AP Chemistry, in 12th grade or something." I'm not sure what grade. I don't know what grades are, but I was like, that's really nice. It's really nice that this show has that history at this point, whereby you can make references, because it felt like Buffy was the newcomer, well into season 4 basically in Sunnydale and in the world, and it feels now that like that kind of reference to we have a history and we're old friends and good friends, it's a lovely transition when you take something and you mutually agree that it's established. I just thought it was really, really nice note. But yeah, no, Willow was very powerful in this episode. She at one point just separates Spike and Xander with a spell, and it's very casual and comfortable for her. And I think it's very similar to what's happening to Buffy, in the sense that it's a responsibility that she has to be powerful because the situation calls for it, and it negatively affects her psychologically in the end. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think that we get another penultimate episode here where Willow very quickly delineates what everyone's role is in the situation. And I think it's always nice to have that set up. It's like you'd like to have a sense of where the players are on the board. In terms of that dream sequence, again, I don't think I realised quite how many dream sequences are in this show. It really is a staple. But we revisit Buffy's conversation with the spirit of the Slayers. We also see Hank in the show again. Yeah. Hank Summers and Joyce Summers, and a fictitious moment when Buffy met her baby sister for the first time. I actually remember that one of the things I thought that potentially the moment was when she was returning to was the moment that Dawn was created in the world.
Oh, okay.
And that was kind of the breaking point or whatever. And we get a good piece of, obviously a good piece of symbolism through all that. I always love the idea of in dream sequences, like you're in a dream, how are you running out of time?
Yeah.
Because there's always a sense that in the real world, things are kind of moving along, alongside it. And a nice bit of completely unnecessary comic stagecraft where we get an explanation that the reason why no one remembers Ben turning to glory is that humans are ensorcelled to immediately forget it, and Spike keeps trying to remind them, and they're like, so you're saying Ben and glory? And I was like, that's very good. Now my question is, do we suspect Ben has something to do with glory?
Yeah, I really like that.
And
once
again, it's Spike as the observer, as the outsider, as the truth sayer, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's very enjoyable in that respect. I think again we also trade on the televisual aspect of it very much in this episode, because when Spike goes to check on Glory's mansion penthouse, we see that the room that whenever we seen from Ben's perspective, him waking up and we thought he was still just Ben, that room is just a room aside from where we've seen Glory all this time. So they've all of course, but they've always been together. Yeah. But the way the camera frames it, we're cheating into in a good way into thinking that they're separate scenes, and that's a nice bit of that dopamine as like the murderer is revealed kind of thing.
No, it is good. I really like the conversation that Dawn has with Glory, because I thought it was really interesting. It was very good writing in the sense that what Glory is saying to Dawn is like, why do you care about any of this? like from what I can see, people are just like hurtling around trying to get themselves killed at all times, and that kind of suicidal intentions concept being very reflected in Buffy's issue of the week here. And what she's saying is like, you all seem to be in so much pain all the time. And what Buffy says to Dawn, obviously, next episode, is that the hardest thing about being in the world, about the world, is living in it.
Yeah. Which is obviously mirrored, Glory says in this episode, tell me one person who can actually pull up with this, and Dawn very confident, like Buffy can. Yeah.
And you can pull that trick on me 8 million times. The moment of like, what's your answer to this? There's no way that blah, 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 blah. What's going to happen? Everything's fucked, blah, blah, blah. And the response being Buffy.
Yeah.
Because Buffy is the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
Yeah. Every show pulls that to better or for worse, and it always works.
Always works with Buffy. I mean, it's the counterpoint moment to Buffy catching the sword and saying me.
Yeah.
Which may be your favorite moment of the show.
I think it's
up there.
Encapsulates it to a large degree.
Is that something we should do at the end of our podcast? Which, by the way, in next episode is episode 100 at 144. So we're hurtling towards the end.
Yeah.
We should finish the podcast by the end of this calendar year.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is we'll finish the podcast in lockdown.
So true. But that's something we can maybe consider, like, going through our favorite moments of Buffy at the end of the show. I think that could be a good one.
I think we need to do an omnibus, definitely.
Yeah.
I subjected you, Brian. You're very gracious about it too. I think it was a good 45 minutes of me ranting about the Buffy and Angel comics the other night, because I have actually read a lot of them recently, so I don't have to subject the listener to it. But something they do trade on in the comics is they repeatedly have Buffy at significant moments saying the thing about the world is. And it's always something different, and the comic ends on basically after they finally basically resolve Slayers forever. And she's like, the thing about changing the world is worth it, and that's kind of the last moment of the comics. I was like, fuck it, I'll take it. I can be influenced by that kind of stuff still.
Influenced, great. Okay, should we move into the dusting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Buffy Bits.
A couple of, as I mentioned, Hank and Joyce are in this episode. I think with the exception of the episode which eternally I want to call Slayer Interrupted, and it's not what it's called.
Yeah. Oh God, I can't remember either.
Slayer, Buffy in the Asylum.
Yeah.
I think it's called their last appearance in the show. Otherwise, I think Joyce appears as a first projection in season 7. I
wouldn't be too surprised.
During conversations with dead people. But it's Hank's second last appearance. And
the first in quite a while. I think the last appearance of Hank in person might have been season 2. Maybe season 1.
I think, but the last time I can remember Hank appearing in person, which is not very often. Pardon me?
Nightmares?
It's Nightmares, yeah. And then otherwise we see the reappearance in this episode of kind of all the people who have been mentally affected by Glory kind of burst out of the wargs and come and build this, which we actually didn't really get a context for in this episode, but they're building the tower that, inconveniently the portal is fucking 200 feet off the ground, which I actually quite like as a point of world building. Why would it be on the ground?
Mm-hmm. Apparently, Sarah Michelle Gellar was filming Scooby-Doo in Australia at the time, and that is why she has very few appearances in this episode. Hilarious. Yeah, it's a Buffy Light episode for that reason. But it's been such a struggle having such a popular and wonderful actor at the helm of your vampire TV show.
At one point in the hospital, they actually don't draw any attention to this, which is like a restraint for this show, but when Spike starts smoking in the hospital, he's standing in front of a no smoking sign, which I noted.
It's such a classic TV bit. People smoking in front of a no smoking sign.
Yeah, so edgy.
Isn't that ironic? No. Go on.
And they have this bit with one of apparently the scab demons have like a priest cast, which is like, they've just so intentionally not explored what's actually happening there. But it had very, for me as a reformed Catholic, it was very Ash Wednesday vibes, I thought, because they're anointing her head with blood.
Blood and then ash, which is very interesting. Going from blood to ash, I was like, there's like some nonsense Catholic like symbolism there that isn't fully explored. I think, again, for our listeners outside of the UK and Ireland, potentially outside of Ireland, I don't know how prevalent it is in the UK. Catholicism?
Well, no, but like seeing the Ash Wednesday kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure. On Ash Wednesday, which is during Easter, if you're walking around Ireland, you'll see, I would say, 3 out of 10 people walking on the road will have ashes on their forehead in the sign of the cross.
In a very
really crappy
crude cross.
Because the priest always does it with his thumb. I'd be very surprised if that's as commonplace in the UK.
Yeah, but it was one of those things. I think it was a TikTok about this recently as well. But there's a couple of those elements of latent Catholicism in the country, like the way that, you know, every day at 6 o'clock on the national broadcaster,
6 o'clock, yeah,
6 o'clock, there's 1 minute of Angelus. And we've definitely talked about the Angelus on this program before, but of bells to call you to mass, essentially. And we're just like, that's just something we accept.
It's actually not to call you to mass, it's to call you to have a moment of prayer.
Okay, well, to warn you that mass is coming or God is looking at you or whatever.
And it's the reason why Ireland, traditionally the news starts at 6:01. It's because you have this moment.
Bizarre.
It is bizarre.
But yeah, the bit of like that a certain day of the year, a large proportion of often quite older people will be walking around with just ashes of Christ on their forehead, and we all just let them on the bus.
Yeah, it's not a great sign for us. Okay, fashion notes. Do you have any, Joe?
So baby Buffy was wearing a adorable little sunflower dress. We see that Ben and Gloria are once again managing to wear a gown which fits both of their very different frames perfectly. And we also have kind of messy hair Spike in this episode.
We do have messy hair Spike,
which I always quite like. You know, it has a very kind of John Constantine Hellblazer vibe around it.
I also quite liked Willow's outfit in this episode. She's wearing a check shirt with a nice like turtleneck underneath, and I was like, oh, that would actually fit in reasonably well today. And I quite like her hair at this length as well. I think it looks quite good. And Buffy, of course, wearing heels throughout her catatonia. So how she got from place to place, we do not know.
Yeah. Did they bend her like a marionette?
And I thought obviously Joyce looks wonderful, beautiful. Love her so much.
She looks younger.
She's supposed to be about like 29 here.
Yeah.
Which is
she goes from 29, but she looks younger.
Yeah, exactly. And then final fashion note I would say is that Giles looks quite well, even while he's like, you know, leaking. He's just wearing casual clothes. I really like when Giles wears casual clothes. Okay. So next we have death count. Very simple. 0
deaths in this episode.
Weird. Okay. And rating. Joe, what do you have for us?
Gosh, yeah, I would I'd probably give this episode a 8.5 Demon Catholics.
Pretty good. Tell me about
that. Yeah, I think it gets a bump from me for a couple of reasons. I thought it was a good episode all around. I thought good characterization, interesting world building, pulling threads together. A plot which is always quite difficult, I think, for fantasy shows. So a solid moral core to it, or kind of question. And yeah, it was better than I didn't remember this episode. I was like, this really, I think I'm going to put this in my little scrapbook of like key narrative moments for the show. Yeah, quite. Yeah. So good for me.
Yeah, I'm going to go meet you at 8.5 Buffys out of 10. So
really phone it in.
I thought it was really funny. I have it written in big block capitals in my
Buffys. It's because it's multiple Buffys.
Well, Willow says Buffy and then goes Buffys.
Yeah, the plural of which apparently is Buffies, according to the subtitles.
Which I agree with.
Yeah.
Yes, I quite like it. It's actually an episode that I specifically remember very distinctly from watching when I was younger, which is funny. I think it has its flaws. I think it's a little slow, and pace-wise, overall for the season, maybe not the greatest penultimate episode. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love what it's setting up for the season finale. Season 5 finale is definitely one of my top 3 season finales for Buffy. Actually, yeah, so probably 2, 5, and 3, I would say, probably. Right? So that sounds right. Oh, 4. Oh, fuck. I think 2, 5, 4. Probably 4, 2, 5 is how I'd go for it. Anyway, really like the season finale of the season, and I definitely like the context at the heart of the show, of the episode. I like dream sequences generally, and this has basically a ton of psychological representation. It's all good. Okay, should we move on to Cordelia Chase, Joe?
Yeah, so over on the Cordelia Chase, we're episode 21 of the season. There's called Through the Looking Glass, which is weird because this trilogy, there's Over the Rainbow, Through the Looking Glass, and There's No Place Like Plixscrib. The two of which are Oz references, Wizard of Oz references, and one of which is a Alice in Wonderland reference.
What was it? Alice in Wonderland? Oh, Look Through the Looking Glass. Yeah, that's true.
But anyway, yes, it's, you know, I'm struggling to remember what specifically happened in this episode out of the 3 of them, because they are a very linked trilogy. But I'll start off by saying it was a perfectly pleasant episode of Angel, the Legendary Adventures with Cordelia, Warrior Princess, etc. You know, Cordelia's been made the princess, essentially because, and we get various twists and turns throughout the episode. The reveal is that because she has the visions, which are a gift from the power that be, the demons in charge, the Covenant of Trombley, want those visions, and they want her to mate with a what they consider to be a horrible demon prince or creature called the Gruselug, to take those visions in a mating act called Comshock. And we get some back and forth and that takes up a lot of the episode, but essentially, and her trying to get out of that, and her pardoning her friends and not pardoning her friends and all that kind of stuff. We essentially see that the Gruselug, or who she comes to call Gru, is actually a very handsome man, who ostensibly is a demon, but I think he has human blood, so he is disfigured by virtue of, it's basically like a bargain based on Twilight Zone episode. He's horribly disfigured by virtue of having a square jaw, massive pecs, and functioning I was going to say memorabilia, genitalia.
Genitalia.
And he's actually, he recurs a little bit more through the show. He's actually quite kind, nice character. I don't dislike Gru at all. Probably the most significant thing overall for the episode is that we have they come to understand that the Covenant is just another arm of a ancient dimension spanning force sect of evildoers called the Wolf, the Ram, and the Heart, or Wolfram and Heart, and that they basically just, wherever they go, they're encountering the senior partners essentially. So it really revolves around that, and understanding that what they're embroiling is more than just a law firm. It's kind of like they've kind of hit the Illuminati of the Buffy universe, as it were. And we have an excursion where we go to visit Lauren's family, where his mother has a beard and she's a big demon, and there's a cousin, Numfar, is doing a funny dance in the background, and he's actually played by Joss Whedon, and we all do a bit around it essentially. Angel has a bit of respite because he's actually getting kind of praised for being a hero, and he's getting some positivity and all that. But then he encounters a situation where they want to kill our new main cast member Fred and eat her, and he frees her. And we also encounter the fact that he, because this is a very binary dimension, when he tries to transform into the vampire, he transforms into this thing called Vantal, which ostensibly is potentially the vampire demon within.
Which is portrayed so shittily, it's unbelievable.
It's just like a feral. It's actually very similar to the werewolves and kind of the earlier, or even the Hell Beast on Buffy. But one nice note I do like from that is eventually when they do subdue him and Fred takes him back, Angel is genuinely devastated and kind of traumatized, and he says he doesn't want to see his friends again because now they know what I really look like and what I am, and they've seen the shame that the inside of him, what he's afraid of. And I think that's actually quite an interesting note. Like, he is, he's often portrayed as like this kind of slightly invincible protagonist character, and that he is still disgusted by what he is, and that's really it. And then there's some other bits and pieces on kind of again doing an adventure, and then the kicker is that we see at the end of the episode, oh no, they've cut off Lauren's head, he's dead. But what we find out in the next episode is apparently he can just get his head cut off. So I don't know why they did it. But it's fine. It's a fine little adventure. I would say 7 out of 10 failed feminist gestures.
Yeah, I'm going for 6 out of 10 failed feminist gestures. I like this whole thing. Takes a lot longer than it should. It's tonally insane for this season of what this show is. Fred's characterization is shit at the beginning of her character arc. She's
been lost for 5 years. She's feral. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, and her accent is wild versus how it becomes. She's portrayed as just this. Her characterization is just fully bad, especially versus how she becomes quite a good character later on in the show. This is like it's a larger leap from early Wesley to Wes, I would say, from early Fred to late Fred. But otherwise, it's fine. It's good fun. I'd nearly go with 5. No, I'll stick with a 6.
Oh, then let's be fair. 6.
Okay.
Minimum.
Okay. Let's just say that I have a preference between the Buffy season 5 finale and the Angel season 2 finale.
You think? Or season 2. Season 2, yeah.
Yeah.
You think, but you haven't seen the Angel one in a while, so maybe it'll overtake Gift for you.
Maybe.
So I think that's everything for this week. Once again, thanks very much for joining us. Very happy to have you here. Hope you're safe. Hope you're well. Hope you're watching Buffy. I'm very close to just putting on early Buffy episodes at this point, just in the background.
That'd be great.
So we hope you join us again next week. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. We really appreciate that. Tell your friends, tell your Joel Greys, and we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
See ya.
See ya.